Hey, it's Jose Galison. You're watching No Way Jose. You can find me on No Way Jose YouTube channel, all the major audio podcatchers, and Odyssey as well. Today, my guest is Jason Rink. If you guys have been paying attention to the show, you saw him in the last 4 Pony Boys. It was the second hour of that. We talked a lot about the Yay stuff. So, figures. We probably won't talk about Yay as much, if at all, this episode. So if you want to hear about his Yay story, he was there at the whole Alex Jones interview. Go check it out. It was definitely a good one. It was a really fun episode. We had Patriot J in the first hour, Jason Rink in the second. It was a good one. So I think you guys will enjoy this one today. I do want to let you guys know I did just change up the whole paywall thing. I'm no longer doing the public live streams. I will still do public live streams for things like 4 Pony Boys. And if there's any like current event stuff, I don't typically cover current events, so that probably won't happen very often. But on the rare occasion I do, it doesn't make sense to release it a week later. But I digress. For the most part, it's just going to be my 4 Pony Boys to remain publicly live streamed, but all the other stuff's going to get paywalled and get released. Like I'll record it, do like a private live stream for my patrons, and then roughly about a week or so later, I'll drop whenever it works out for my schedule. Just so you guys know. So if you want to be a patron and support that, it's as low as $2. Patreon.com, just No Way Jose 2020. The highest level is my sponsors, the $20 level. And Mikkel Thorpe of the Expat Money Show. I have Jeremy, who has an Etsy store, etsy.com/shop/raising-liberty. Follow him at Jeremy Rhymes. And Toad, my co-host on Tower Gang. We just rebranded to Tower Gang. Definitely go check out that show. Go check out Toad. You can follow him on Twitter at TPH_Toad. Also, make sure you go get some merch. Get some No Way Jose merch at TopLobsta.com. Use Jose at checkout for 10% off. He's got other merch as well. Other show merch and other stuff that's not podcast related. He's got a lot of good stuff I highly suggest checking out. Without further ado, let's get in here. Let's get Jason in. Let's get into it. Hey, what's up, man?
Hey, what's up, brother? How are you?
Good. I just had to do my little spiel. I'm glad to have you. We had a great conversation last week. I would suggest people check it out. That was fun.
Yeah, it was last minute, I was just like, hey, I'll come on and talk about this topic. And you had like a power lineup that day. It was like rotating people in and out. Reed was on, he was gone, Patriot J, and then I slid in at the end. And so, yeah, good times. Yeah,
it was very just weirdly worked out because it was like I saw you commented on a promo I did for it. And I was just like, you know what? I bet he'd make a good addition. And then it actually just so worked out because I just did a shitty job as a host and I didn't add. Because usually my 4 Pony Boy series, I'm shooting for like an hour and a half to 2 hours because the normal format is like me, Reed, TopLobsta, and Clint, and a guest. Maybe one of the guys sometimes can't make it, so it might be only 4, but it's 4 or 5 people. So you need to give people time to speak. So I assume an hour and a half, 2 hours. Me being a shitty host, I didn't even ask. And I've done this every time, and I always go make a mental note, like ask them next time how much time they have. And I just always keep forgetting. And then Patriot J, I was like, on the moment, like right before, you got 2 hours, right? He's like, what? I was like, oh, my bad. It's like, it just worked. And it worked out perfectly. Showed up because otherwise it was just going to be me, TopLobsta, and Clint just like kind of vamping for another like half hour,
Which, that could be pretty lit too. So, but yeah, that was fun, man. That was fun.
Yeah, that was a blast. I mean, I guess on the off chance people didn't see that episode or they haven't seen you elsewhere, you want to provide them, let people know who you are, what you're about. Definitely, I know you have a long resume, a lot of stuff you're working on. Feel free to expand on all the different projects you're working on right now.
Yeah, I'll give you the short version. Jason Rink. I'm down here in Austin, Texas. I have a video production company, professionally, and produce documentary films on the side as the passion project. I'm a veteran of Ron Paul 2007, 2008 campaign days, which is what got me into the ideas of like liberty and whatnot. And and so I've just been kind of doing that thing for a while, and recently got back involved in sort of the world of politics when I decided to document the Stop the Steal movement after the 2020 election, just sort of on a whim. I just was interested. I had some free time, and that led me to follow Ali Alexander, Nick Fuentes, Alex Jones, all of these cast of characters around the country. Led me to be in DC on January 6th and managed to get the exclusive interview with the QAnon shaman 48 hours before he went into jail after he went into the Capitol. And so I've got several films that are released or in production right now. One of them is called The Most Canceled Man in America, which is about Nicholas J. Fuentes of the America First show and movement. And then another film called Q Sent Me, which is a series. We're getting ready to release another episode of that soon. We're a little bit behind schedule, but we've got 3 episodes of that dropping. The first one is available at a service called Movies Plus at mymoviesplus.com. And the Most Canceled Man in America can be seen there for free right now at mymoviesplus.com with the recent news of Nick Fuentes and Ye rolling together. We made that for free because there's a lot of people who knew who Ye was but have no idea who this other guy is that he's like walking through the airport with. So, yeah, that's my story, man. And yeah, so I like to, I've had my head in the election integrity, January 6th. And been canceled from many, many platforms as a result of the work I've been doing there.
Yeah, I actually had you on the show. I don't know, it must have been something like a year or so ago.
Yeah,
it's been a while, and it was around the time you were working on that Q Sent Me type stuff and some of the election stuff. And we had you have entered the ranks of the handful of shows that is not on YouTube for my show.
yeah.
It didn't get pulled, but after my strike, I was like, that was one of the ones that came to mind. I was like, I probably should just pull that because it's like it seems to be once you get a strike, it's like they'll look for other stuff. And I was like, yeah, I took that one down, and I took down my Joe Rogan N-word episode. So.
Yeah, I've been on Tom Woods' show like 3 times in the last several months, and none of those make it to YouTube. Pete Quinones put me on, and he got a YouTube strike and a suspension. So it's like it's a good idea not to. And it's sort of funny because I'm like, who am I? I'm like, am I some dangerous figure to the regime and establishment, or is it just when I speak on a podcast, words are said that the AI flags immediately? I don't know what it is, but yeah, I'm pretty toxic to platforms. Therefore, I don't get as many opportunities to come on shows as I wish, but I always like to come on somewhere, especially where we don't have to censor ourselves too much.
Yeah, I mean, maybe some words be a little safe here, but surprisingly, that other episode did not get taken down. I took that on my own volition when that strike hit, just out of being safe. But yeah, I don't know how that one didn't. We definitely, it was at the peak of the censorship, but I think maybe it's just at a small enough show it didn't catch in the algorithm. But
Yeah,
I was like, I'll just be safe. But yeah, we'll definitely cover some of that. A lot of stuff we talked about in that episode, kind of, it's coming back here. But you kind of give me a perfect segue ending on Fuentes. I want to talk about Fuentes because he's a guy I've never really done a deep dive on, mostly just because I kind of just don't care. Like,
right.
Most of the appeal of Fuentes is the outrage, and that he always seems to outrage the people I don't like. So I just kind of generally tend to be like, well, it must not be that bad. Like, kind of like a Trump phenomenon where it's like, well, I don't agree with everything, but I don't really find him that offensive. I guess what is your opinion and of him just generally, and then we can kind of maybe start going to his like political philosophy, because that's where a lot of people have issues, and I don't even know. I mean, obviously it'd be great to have Fuentes, but I haven't got to that level to where I can kind of pull a dude like that. Maybe in the future I would gladly have him on the show. I don't care.
Yeah, right. Well, it's interesting because I didn't know who Nick was until I started following the Stop the Steal movement, because I voted for Gary Johnson in 2016. I wasn't a MAGA guy. I'm still not a MAGA guy. I don't even know what that means anymore. But like, I voted for Trump, but didn't like make the decision until like 60 days before the election in 2020, probably. Like it sort of occurred to me. I was like, I actually think I'm going to vote for Trump, like what's happening? I'm a libertarian at heart, but I sort of saw this whole thing of like the left's control of the institutions, academia, mainstream press, Hollywood, all of that. I was like, they all hate Trump, and he must be dangerous in some way. They're coming at him with everything. So that's kind of where I started to wake up to the idea that, like, oh, he's an anti-establishment figure. Maybe he poses some threat to the power base. Wasn't really clear on what that looked like. And so then when the election happened, I followed it the evening of the election and, had some questions or whatever. I was like, this is odd, because I've watched election returns many, many years out of my life. I just turned 48 this year. So, I mean, I have been a political guy for like going on 20 years now. And, when it started happening and I started seeing the Stop the Steal movement popping up, it reminded me of like the Tea Party movement, but more anti-establishment. I was involved in the Tea Party movement in the aftermath of Ron Paul. That thing got co-opted very quickly with establishment GOP types. And so Stop the Steal movement just seemed like interesting. And I was like, I want to see what's going on here. This seems like a story. And so I connected with Ali Alexander on Twitter. Didn't know him, went out with my filmmaking partner, Paul Eskindone, and we just followed them around the country, really. And it was on one of the first stops when we were in Georgia. I think it was like the second day we were in Georgia, mid-November. There was this event outside of the governor's mansion. There was like a big group of like hundreds of people out across the street from the governor's mansion. And there was this young dude, like in this like green jacket. It was like sort of activist mode, bullhorn. And he was just off the dome for like 45 minutes or whatever. We're filming it. The energy's there. It's multicultural, young people. And it turned out that guy was Nick Fuentes. And I didn't know who he was, never heard of him. And that night when I heard him speaking in that activist mode, giving that like rally speech, he struck me as somebody that was like a person to watch, just from the standpoint of like his ability to articulate ideas, going off the cuff, getting people engaged, like very articulate, very knowledgeable about foreign policy, like globalism, all of this stuff. And I was just kind of like, man, who is this guy? And he's interesting. And so that was my first experience with him. I'd never heard his show. I didn't know all of the like bad things about him or whatever. And as we were on the Stop the Steal tour, didn't really have an opportunity to like spend any time with him or meet him, but we had filmed a number of things that he was involved in. And so in the aftermath of January 6th, we caught wind of the fact that he, that the federal government seized $500,000 from his bank account, and he was put on a no-fly list without being charged with a crime. And at this point, I'd started to follow him a little bit. I'd watched some of his shows. He occurred to me as like a young Zoomer who is like ironic, funny, and irreverent. And that was like what he was doing. He had a very passionate following online. A lot of people who, followed what he was doing. And so as we heard about this story, I was like, well, it doesn't really matter what anybody, what his ideas are. The federal government doing that to that guy, I've been around long enough. And this point, I'd already been canceled. Alex Jones had been canceled. Trump had been canceled. All these people. I'm like, this is canary in the coal mine stuff, because when the federal government goes in and takes this kind of action, that's violating the Constitution all over the place. And the reason they do it to a guy like Nick is because no one will defend him, right? He had been debanked at some places from a standpoint of like his PayPal was shut down, Stripe, whatever. He couldn't process credit cards online. He couldn't get an Airbnb. He couldn't get a Lyft. So he was the most canceled man in America. And I'm like, why? And it's just because he was a political activist who I think the regime finds dangerous, And so we decided to make a short film about him. It was really the idea of Paul, my partner, and he went and interviewed Nick. He earned enough trust from him. He knew that we were involved in the covering Stop the Steal. And so we got Nick's story at that time. And I still hadn't spent that much time with him, but then I went to his event. He has an annual event called AFPAC. And at the beginning of 2020, is really where I ended up connecting with him. I'd met him a couple of times before that, but ended up spending a lot of time with him at AFPAC because we filmed that, and some of that story became part of the most canceled man in America film. And so, so I am definitely was an outsider seeing what Nick was up to, recognizing that AFPAC was like 14 or 1,500 people. And, this is a guy who's been removed from all platforms, and yet he can still pull together 1,500 people in real life. And like Marjorie Taylor Greene spoke at it. It was like, that's like almost as, I mean, I don't know how big Freedom Fest is, but like, that's a big event, And so I was like, this guy's actually, something's happening here. And so, and then I started listening to more about what he was talking about, how he identified himself. I've seen a lot of his shows. And I saw how the media was was identifying him, and how what he would say, was true. And I started to say, well, I actually think the way that Nick describes himself is accurate. Like, he's a Christian nationalist. Like, he's not a libertarian, and he doesn't fit within the mainstream of the Republican Party, and and he talks about white identity issues, and one thing that I think I have started to understand, I don't go out there and talk about white identity issues, but I think that if identity politics is going to be a thing, like if groups can take their identity, whatever it is, trans, gay, women, black, whatever, and they can shape and form an interest group around it and push for policies that benefit that group or whatever, I'm like, then whites can do that too. Like, so I don't see white identity politics as any different than any other identitarian politics out there. And not to say that necessarily I love identitarian politics, but it's like, these are the political realities we're in. And so, so I mean, that's my long rant as far as like how I first got to know Nick, how I experienced him. I will say personally, like, I really like Nick. I've spoken to him at length. I find him funny, articulate. His ideas are well thought out. He's very committed to what he believes. As a 24-year-old man, he's been doing this for like 6 years. And, his entire trajectory of his life is not going to be the same based on the fact how he's gone out there to just stand in his conviction about what he thinks and believes. And so I don't think that Nick is a white supremacist. Like, I don't think he's a racist. I think, but I do think that he talks about things that nobody else will talk about. And he has, gotten to the place where he's so canceled that he can, and he's still allowed to function. He's still able to make a living, and he has built his own video streaming platform that's really great and robust. And, he's really up to something. So that's how it is. I consider Nick a friend. I like him personally. And, I think that one of the things I said when we made the film, and I ran into a bunch of problems with Freedom Fest, some people might have heard about that. I said at that point, like, look, this is not a guy to ignore, right? You may not agree with his politics or his positions, but he's actually a force to be reckoned with. He's not going away, and he's only drawing more and more people into his ranks. So the better strategy would be not to say we can't platform this guy, but let's engage in conversation. Let's have debates about the ideas with him and the people who are following him.
Yeah. So you don't see him as a white supremacist. Would you think it'd be fair to call him a white separatist? Because and the reason why I ask is that seems to be what a lot of people I kind of tend to respect seem to think. They actually seem to know something about him. And I do think it's an important distinction, because I think anytime anyone hears any white anything, they immediately assume racism.
Yeah.
And I can get it, because honestly, dividing along ethnic lines is kind of dumb. I mean, I can make a bell curve argument myself and say maybe certain races are more likely to do this or that, or have this culture or that culture. But generally speaking, it's probably one of the least important, attributes. It probably determines, probably the clothes you wear probably tells me more about you than your color of your skin.
Right. Yeah.
But, like, statistically speaking, you can make inferences generally to some extent. But yeah.
Yeah, and I wouldn't want to put any words in his mouth about whether he would consider himself a white separatist. What I would say is, I think that the idea of race and cultures being different, right, and it not being like that's not a positive or a negative. It's just a reality that different races and the cultures that come with those. And just to be clear, I am attempting to articulate what I think is happening over there with him in the America First mindset around this issue. I'm not necessarily articulating what I think right now. What I'm saying is that the argument is that we can look at races and cultures and recognize that there are differences and preferences around them, and that's real. And people of certain races and cultures also sometimes tend to group together, want to preserve those cultures, things about those cultures in communities, in society, whatever. And so for me, I think that's an interesting discussion. Like, I think, and I think something that Nick has said and would say is that the globalist agenda is actually to make us culture less, is to take and eliminate any distinctions of culture, or to turn us into this sort of like globalist,
Global
yeah,
Global
and it's and ultimately it's like not going to honor any culture or any race, right? But that the path to that, it involves destroying certain distinctions at the cultural level. So, and again, I think this is an interesting conversation to have, right?
I would even admit race is a component in that. I just think it's usually, generally speaking, a lesser component.
Yeah.
I do think on some base level, human beings tend to group up with like human beings, and that is one characteristic of which people will tend to group. I have far more white friends than I have black friends. Coincidentally, my best friend's a black dude, but pretty much all my other friends are white. And I'm sure my black friend, if I was to look at all his friends, he probably has far more black friends than white friends. So, that's just how it tends to work,
Yeah, and I just want to add one thing. Like, the way that I've lived my life is I roll with lots of people that are different than me, that believe different things. I've always been somebody that I've tried to like be able to have conversations with people that I totally disagree with. I think some of this goes back to, I was a pastor for a time in the early 2000s, and like I was always trying to have an outreach mode and always trying to find common ground with people. And so I'm absolutely against these ideas of like, oh, you can't even hang out with people you disagree with, or that their ideas are quote unquote reprehensible, whatever that means. Like, I don't disavow people. I will associate with whoever I want. And that doesn't speak anything to about what I believe about anything, except for the fact that I actually like to surround myself with a strong diversity of ideas and people. And, and I really think something interesting is happening in the America First movement. And as a filmmaker and as somebody that's diving into right-wing culture and stuff that I'm covering, like, that's attracting me there. And I'm not doing it like a guy that I'm like, oh, I'm looking at this, what's this weird thing that I don't like or know anything about. No, like I find myself agreeing with some positions of the America First movement, and I don't consider myself like an America First guy. I'm not rolling with Ye right now, like, oh, whatever Ye's position is, that's what it is. I think that it would be valuable for, here's one thing. What I will say is, right now, I think the real place that we have to unify as people and as a nation is those of us who are against the establishment, right? That are against the power structure. And I think we have to find a way to unite with other people who are actually against the establishment, the power structure, even if they have a diversity of beliefs on other issues that we may not agree with, because the establishment power structure is so entrenched, it's so deep, it's so dominant in culture and in politics that we have to cast aside almost everything else that divides us for us to have a chance to stop it. And the America First movement is a big wing of that. Like, the MAGA movement's a wing of that. I would even say like the libertarian movement is a wing of that. And is that in that it's anti-establishment, and that dividing all of these anti-establishment groups apart is going to make it so that we can't actually get any traction to make a difference or to stop steamrolling of the power structure and the establishment. So I think that's also the eyes that I see there.
Yeah, I think there's something to be said. I mean, especially since we were talking about like culture and groups, and I guess that kind of includes race. The irony here is that, like, for example, like say with an actual legit white supremacist, if they're anti-establishment, who cares? We're trying to break away from the global homogeny. That's what global homo is for people who don't know. I know people think it means gay. I mean, it does kind of make it funny that people think that.
Yeah,
I don't care.
Right.
Take what you mean, but it means global.
I mean, it is gay. Like, but yeah,
yeah, that too. But that's what it means. So it's like the globalist agenda type shit. The idea of kind of like making one just gray type culture that everyone just kind of blends into. And the idea is really that even the white supremacist should be able to have his corner that he can feel happy. Just I don't know, maybe in that little area, the black people don't go there or whatever, and the black supremacists have their own little area. Who gives a shit?
Dude,
So
if we actually experience national divorce and secession, like I'm absolutely fine with a state that is totally white separatist or whatever. Like I mean, look, I think people can associate in a community, in a county, in a city, in a state, in any way, and that's going to mean that people get together and live in a way that I may or may not agree with, right? And I think the difference between those of us in the libertarian and that aren't on the progressive left, like I think the progressive left ultimately, or whatever we want to call it, like they don't want anybody to have the right to live in a way that they disapprove of, like at all. Like for there to be a deep red state, full of like Trump supporters is an abomination to them. Like they want to try to figure out how to eliminate that. Whereas I'm like, look, I don't care if there's a big blue state that does all sorts of things that I hate. And if we have this big red state and then we have this other one that's like, Richard Spencer's governor of or whatever, it's like, I mean, and maybe that rubs people the wrong way because maybe I'm supposed to be animated by, total human flourishing and freedom, whatever that means, or whatever. And I'm just like, look, I don't even believe everybody wants to be free. I don't even believe that's actually true. Like, I actually think that there's a lot of people who make the bargain with the state because it's got temporary benefits at the surrender of responsibility and freedom. And people are free to make that bargain, so I don't feel like we have to try to free everybody. Like that's actually not even what some people want, in my opinion. And I think some libertarians kind of have that mantle. It's like, until everybody is free, it's like, dude, not everybody wants it. You don't understand that. So that's my opinion. Maybe people disagree with me on that, but
yeah, in an ironic way, if you're taking away the chains of someone who wants their chains, it's kind of an almost anti-liberty position. So
yeah,
that's what they want. That's what they want. I mean, it's a little bit of a paradox. They want their consent to be withdrawn essentially, or not to have the ability to consent or whatever. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think you touched on something that I thought was kind of interesting. I think you talk about the progressive mindset and trying to control everything. I think one good example of that is you look at Kyrie Irving and the shit he's gone through. Like he shared a link to a documentary that was on Amazon that I never watched it. I don't know. Maybe it is just pure Jew hating vitriol. I don't know. But seems to be the takeaway I've gotten from a lot of people is some generic Black Israelite stuff. And I haven't seen anything from any press conferences Kyrie ever said that could be seen as offensive. He even seemed to make allusions to the fact that he kind of believes Black people are the real Jews. So how can he be anti-Jewish? And they still, that was never enough for them. They needed full and utter surrender. It became an ideological battle that they had to win one way or another. And I think he did sort of cave somewhat. I don't know. But I don't know if you have any comments on that. I just thought that was a good example of kind of the compare and contrast of what we're talking about.
Yeah, and I mean, I think there's a real parallel between him and Ye, frankly, and I mean, obviously, but the underlying dimension of it is like the ability for somebody who has a large platform, reach, or influence to communicate unapproved thoughts or to break ranks from like sacred narratives, right? Like that's kind of what I see in that. And I think some of what Ye's leaned into is he's got this real curiosity because, you know, he was a billionaire. 4 days later, he couldn't use Apple Pay, right? And he's like, whoa, you know, this is a big deal. And by the way, if I'm rich and powerful, you know, what about the regular people, right? And he really thinks, he's really thought about that. He's like, wow, this is crazy. If it can happen to me, it can happen to anybody. And I think it made him think about, like, what is the sacred narrative that I violated here, right? And he did violate a sacred narrative. And when people start digging deeper into this, you know, I think the question is like, why is this a sacred narrative? Why is this narrative so much more? If you violate this narrative, your life is over, versus other narratives, you know, like, you know, and we could go down that rabbit trail. I don't really want to, but I'm just saying, even for me, like, I'm a person where I'm like, oh, there's a sacred narrative here. Okay, let's see what's going on there. Like, I want to slaughter sacred cows, right? And so I think that's what's at issue. And it's like, well, who benefits, like, who, and I don't want to say like who is they. And again, I really think they is like the elite power structure. Like, I think I think the religion they subscribe to is not a traditional religion, right? It's a religion. I mean, it's maybe Satanism, somebody would say, or whatever, but it's like there is an elite global power structure that controls the narrative, and the internet.
And I'm not going to say with an ethnicity that. No, I'm just kidding.
Yeah, right. Yeah. Yeah, no, it's like I'm really honestly saying it's like, you know.
Yeah, I know, I'm with you. It's the Kanye line. You heard him.
Yeah.
He's like, I'm not gonna say what ethnicity. They were doing.
Yeah, yeah, and it's like the point is like there is some force and power that has the ability to destroy lives, to make you surrender, to make you repent of violating a sacred narrative. And it's like, I just want more attention, like, paid to that, and say, what is it? Not I say, listen, I've violated several sacred narratives. It's why I'm kicked off of the internet. It's the election is a sacred narrative. You know, the January 6th is a sacred narrative. Some people were kicked off for violating the sacred narrative of COVID, right? And so it's like this is a real issue right now, and it's like one of the reasons I think we're seeing this is because for a season the internet was pretty free. There was a lot of places you could go and things that you could do, and it was very much more decentralized. And as the centralization has happened, those avenues have gotten captured, and they've become captured, and they must like bow down to the sacred narratives, right? And we're seeing that there's like friggin' spooks all up in Twitter, and we know they're all up in YouTube and Facebook. It's probably way worse in those organizations. And so the consolidation of communication and the internet, and now the capture of it, and then the elimination of the problematic voices, that's what we've witnessed over the last like 4 years. And so that's why all of this is at stake. And so with a guy like Kyrie, with somebody like Ye, what I see is people out there who are taking courageous stands, in a general sense, on this idea of like, what does it mean to have free speech, and what does it mean to question a sacred narrative? So anyway, I might have gone way off topic on your question.
No,
there,
that's
but
fine. I enjoyed it. I was debating, going full on to the JQ, but we don't have enough time for that. Because I do want to touch a little bit, because there is something to. I don't think there is some sort of intrinsic characteristic of Judaism or Jewish people, and that's actually kind of a lot of the kind of a point I'm sort of getting to, is the idea that it's religious, it's racial, it's cultural, it's all these different things. It's just like catch-all. I do think that there have essentially been incentives put in place that allow. I'm trying to figure out the right way to phrase it. Allow certain people to advance certain in certain ways, and also give them this kind of like catch-all, like, oh, you're doing this, kind of this protection. So I do think there is something to that, and that's why I think you end up seeing a lot of people in these high up spots. There's also the connection to the actual state of Israel. So then a lot of what gets perceived as like oh, the Jews. It's like, well, no, that's like Israelis. Those are legit Israeli people that are like in the higher echelons of government. So like it's all these things sort of get blended into one. There's also this, like I was kind of alluding to, this immediate catch-all, like, oh, you're anti-Semitic whenever you point out anything they don't like, or even like you can have a criticism of Israel and it'll be anti-Semitic, and it's like they will essentially, it's this like it's super hard not to be anti-Semitic by the way they define anti-Semitic, because it's a race, because it's a culture, because it's a religion, and so it's like, well, which one of these am I violating? It gets way too confusing to be able to parse your way through.
Is it a race, a culture, a nation state? Like, what is criticizing? It's like Ye said this, so this on Jones. So he's like, if I criticize the Mossad, is it misogynistic? You know, I mean, so it's like, yeah, it's like, can I criticize the intelligence agency of the nation state of Israel? Like, where's the line? And the irony of this, right? And this is how it is for a lot of things when you think about it, but it's like, I think there are a lot of people now who are kind of like, okay, either this is or isn't true, but like we're seeing some things now that it's like, well, wait a minute. So, you know, earlier this week, 5 Jewish groups came out and they issued a statement calling on big tech to censor content creators who share their platform with Ye, like ADL, SPLC, a couple other ones of them. Okay. And it's like, okay, that happened, right? And then I think the ADL is like lobbying the government for like $500 million in funding. Like, wait, because of the rise in anti-Semitism, right? And it's like, wait, hold on. Like, can I for a minute just stop and say, wait, is this a big freaking grift? Like, if the ADL gets $500 million of my tax dollars, right, because of the rise of anti-Semitism, then I start to think, wait, is it in their interest to generate the public belief that we are seeing this historic rise in anti-Semitism, right? Like, that's not, am I crazy to think that? Or is that like just something that I'm going to look at? And so for me, I'm just like, oh yeah, that's a great grift if you could pull it off. But it's like, if we are not living in a time of a historic rise of anti-Semitism, then some of these organizations cease to have a reason to exist. And I will say this about the freaking National Cancer Society, or any other organization that's tasked with, you know, their sole purpose of existence is to like solve a problem, right? It's like, once the problem's solved, they should disband. Well, if the problem just continues on forever and is growing, you know, like they continue to raise money and are funded. So I don't care what the issue is, but people look, you know, it's not hard to look at that stuff and be like, well, wait, is he so far off of the target if this is what's happening, you know? And so, and it's like, it's weird. Benjamin Netanyahu issued a statement about Nick Fuentes. It's like, we're living in a strange world where this is happening. So, you know, I just say to all of it, I just say, look, my curiosity tends to lead me into places that I'm not supposed to go. And I think there's a lot of people that are that way. And so everything that's happening right now, I think, is leading people to just start questioning sacred narratives. And I think this exists in the realm of sacred narrative. And I think getting to the bottom as to why and what's going on there doesn't make you a Holocaust denier or somebody who hates Jews and loves Hitler. No, it's like, I think we're all trying to figure out how the world actually works.
Yeah. Oh, there was another little point I want to add to that. I think there also is some dimension. This kind of touches on the Fuentes talk we were having before, where groups do act in certain ways. And essentially, you know, to get to my point of it being a racial, religious, national, cultural thing, it essentially created a super group where, like, now you essentially have this weird inbuilt, you know, camaraderie between these groups. You know, whenever there's this call of anti-Semitism, there'll be people who, especially if they haven't really looked into the topic, will immediately have a feeling of that's bad because they may not know. And it could be someone that's doing it to a religious Jew or something, and now someone's calling the bullhorn of anti-Semitism, and an atheist, cultural Jew could take up the banner on his behalf. So there is some sort of group dynamics that's happening here that gives it more power than your normal group dynamic, because in a normal group dynamic it may be more one-dimensional as opposed to, you know, the I don't know, the community of mechanics are upset about this thing, and it's like, well, it'd be weird if I don't know, the dry cleaners started getting involved. And, you know,
Right,
but now
right.
if you gave them the same word, you know, they
Yeah.
for some reason dry cleaners and mechanics were called the same thing. Like, well, they're being anti-mechanic, and the dry cleaners may jump in being kind of not knowing the situation. So
Yeah.
there is some sort of dynamic there where they essentially have created like a perfect little super group. And I don't mean that in some nefarious way. I think it's just more of a language thing in some ways. Whether that was intentional, I don't know.
Yeah.
Could be.
And I do also want to point something out, is that, you know, we live at a time now too where words are thrown around just to delegitimize people and make it so that nobody has to honestly engage with their ideas, right? So whether it's misogynistic, homophobic, transphobic, racist, anti-Semitic, I'm leaving some out, right? But all of those words carry with it a certain weight that once publicly attached to somebody and it's put out there into the world, that it gives people an excuse not to even think about it, to talk about it. Now it's like, oh, I can't even put that person on a platform to debate them, right? And like for me, I'm to the point now where I'm like, oh, that's just a tactic of the left or of individuals who want to shut these ideas down. And for me now, I'm just like, oh, there's a dangerous idea. Why is this a dangerous idea to the establishment? And so and I think some of these words are losing their power because they've been thrown around so much. Like, people know, it's like, what, you know, now that Donald Trump was literally Hitler, like, nobody is, right? I mean, it's like, and so that's what I think is the other thing that's so powerful about it. I mean, even Freedom Fest, like, you know, after the whole dust up with Nick and they, you know, banned him and banned the movie, you know, it didn't stop the SPLC from being like, Andrew Yang is the Asian face of white supremacy because Clint Russell and Reed Coverdale and Nick Fuentes got kicked out, but he was there. And it's like, it's not going to stop them to doing like 6 degrees to Hitler for everybody. So on the other hand, I'm just like, they're going to call me a white supremacist, not Nazi, you know, misogynist or whatever anyway, you know, possibly just because I'm a white guy, but, you know, also because I have the wrong political beliefs. So on the other hand, I'm kind of like, maybe I'll just lean into it a little bit.
Yeah. Next question. We were talking about Fuentes earlier. Kind of want to get your thoughts on Fuentes as essentially being counsel to Ye, because we talked about this in the episode I had with you. Some of the main narrative or the idea I think behind Ye is almost like, I kind of said this before, it's almost like a sifting mechanism, because you can just look at the clips and be like, oh my God, he said I love Hitler or this or that. Or you can watch the whole entire thing and try to understand in its entirety what he was saying. Yeah, maybe he said a little bit extra, said some things for comedic effect or this or that, but what did he mean? Can you interpret this with a favorable interpretation? And I feel like, personally, myself, I know a lot of people say like, oh, he should get somebody like Dave Smith or somebody else to be his counsel that's better on the ideas. I think if you're focused on the specific policies, you're kind of missing the point. I think there is something to having Fuentes, because he's essentially does what Ye does, but in a different way. He does it in more of an intellectual way, where he'll say things that people find offensive, but if anything, they sometimes find it more offensive or offensive in a different way because he's intellectualizing it. Whereas Ye is not really making an attempt. If anything, he's more making a spiritual type of argument in a lot of ways. Whereas then he'll be like, I'm going to kick it to you, Nick, and then he will kind of make like the intellectual, and it's like, so it's almost like they're hitting it on different rounds, where you can have, you could have Fuentes talking about the bell curve or something, and somebody would get offended because it's like, oh, how dare you bring up this racist, blah, 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 blah. And then as opposed to, Ye just making I like Hitler, and then later explaining like, well, I believe in Christian love or what have you, and we should love our enemies, et cetera, et cetera. So it's almost like they're hitting it on different things, which I don't know if anyone else could really do that quite like Fuentes in this certain thing. Like, because if you got somebody like a Dave Smith, it's not to say he doesn't ever say funny or edgy things. He does. but it's a little bit different with somebody like Fuentes, you know.
Yeah. There's a couple things I would say about this. No, to steal a phrase from my friend Ali Alexander, he says, politics is art and science, right? And so, like, I think on one hand, you got Ye is the art and Fuentes is the science, so to speak, right? In that way, and I think libertarians could learn a lot from the idea that politics is art and science, because we tend to talk about the science a lot, and the facts a lot and the consistency a lot and everything. And it's like, but not impacting the culture. Right. And so I think that is at play, certainly. And at the same time, I do know that in some time that I spent with Ye, because some of your viewers might know this or not, but I picked him up from the airport the night before. I hung out in his hotel room a couple of hours that night, picked them all up. The next morning, drove to the sporting goods store and bought the net, went to Alex Jones' studio and hung out there for the whole thing. And so I listened to a number of conversations that were being had, heard him talk about different things that he believes and thinks. And he is aware that at a certain degree, intentionally, he is like crashing through the wall like a battering ram, a wall that he sees and something that he is trying to tear down, right? And recognizing that he's not necessarily the surgical tool to do it, but he's like a blunt object that makes an impact, and recognizes that, like, hey, I need some surgical tools as well to like kind of expose this thing and to shade and nuance this thing. And the other thing is that I don't think it's like a mistake that a guy, people have to call him crazy because it's the only way they can make sense of it. They're like, oh, Nick is a racist white supremacist hanging out with Ye. Oh, so he's crazy. And Nick Fuentes got into his head, or, it's like, people don't have any way to make it make sense. And it's like, no, what if actually they have found camaraderie and common ground around how the establishments come against them and certain ideas that are contained there. But it's like, that is an interesting and powerful thought if you think about it. Let's just pretend everything they say about Nick is true, that he's actually a white supremacist and a racist, and you have Ye, and that their desire to take down the establishment is so unifying that it could bring even them together to do it. Right. I don't think that's actually true about Nick, but like, that is what I was talking about earlier, where I was like, what if you could get people very diverse to come together and be like, yeah, we don't believe the same things, but fuck the state. Right. Like, and the establishment and the people who are trying to destroy our lives, steal our wealth from us, keeping us from seeing our family who's dying, like injecting us with fake crap for billions to be made by the pharmaceutical companies, and want to make us bow down and kiss the ring of, the politically correct left people who run everything. And so I don't know. It's an interesting. I think that's also why it's a head scrambler, because it's like, it would. And what if I told you he's not crazy? Yeah. Well, then what?
Yeah. No, I think the crazy thing is honestly kind of the low. Maybe I wouldn't say low IQ. It's almost like the low information take. Like or just the lazy take, because it's like, yeah, sure, maybe this just seems like a lot of effort for a crazy person, but I don't know. I've gotten a little bit of flack online because I said I think I see massive potential for this movement, and then a lot of people immediately everyone assumes I'm thinking like, oh, what do you think he's going to end up in the Oval Office? No, I don't think we'll ever see Ye in the Oval Office. Even if he did get elected, I don't think he'd end up in the Oval Office. Right. He's not like, yeah, sure, maybe, I guess it's possible. I could be wrong. Could eat my words, but I think without a doubt, I think already he has punched a hole in culture and, caused a lot of things to be maybe, I don't know. I have a hard time actually even really drawing a lot of negatives because, like we alluded to in the episode I had you on last week, like, he normalized MK Ultra in Hollywood infiltration.
Right.
So it's like, oh yeah, that's old news. That's a thing that happens.
Well, and here's the other thing. Like, I actually think this is another dilemma we have, right? Like, I am to the place now where, like, so Trump wins in 2016, And in a large way, he's a billionaire with international brand name recognition. Okay. Like that plays a part. Okay. And he was anti-establishment figure. You can argue how much on the spectrum, whatever, but he was somebody that couldn't be controlled. And I think they didn't have any real dirt on him is the other thing. Like Ye even talked about this a little bit, where it's like, look, and you know, through whatever you believe about how the whole Epstein thing was run, it's like the thing is for decades, all powerful and influential people have been honeypotted to some degree to have life damaging, you know, dirt on them so they can be blackmailed and they can be held in control. And it's like Trump somehow managed to not have like any, because they haven't been able to do that to him, right? And he's not as dirty as his peers in Washington, you know what I mean? And it's like, but he was an anti-establishment figure who got into the presidency, and he was not able to be controlled. They don't want that to ever happen again. And so anyone who's like, oh yeah, Ron Paul or Rand Paul or like Dave Smith or whatever, it's like, okay, we could get into the mechanics as to why that probably can't happen, but it's like that is the system is designed to prevent exactly that from happening. Mitt Romney can get in, friggin' Ron DeSantis can get in probably, by the way, because by the time he gets there, he's probably going to be watered down and compromised in a way that is going to make him ineffective. What they can't allow is another huge celebrity with name recognition to come in and like possibly get in there, right? And so I actually think it's almost our only hope at the highest levels is it's like we actually need to find rich celebrities who are anti-establishment and get them to try to go to the highest offices. It's literally the only way it's going to happen. And that's what I actually believe right now. Like, I think we're just going to get versions of like, it's the Hegelian dialectic. It's like, you know, problem, reaction, solution. It's like the ratchet effect. It's all of that. And it's like he represents like a more radical version of 2016 Trump in a way, with bigger celebrity, with bigger name recognition, to groups of people, by the way, who weren't necessarily in the Trump world, right? And so we can say he'll never get into the White House. He's not serious president. What I say is I'm like, look, I actually think there's a real threat to expose how the game is run and how the thing is played. And so that's what I'm here for in a lot of ways. I'm not here for the policy positions. You know?
Yeah, my big thing is I also think he will, even if he doesn't engage with these other political actors, whether it be debates or whatever, him just having that spectacle will have an effect, even if he doesn't get anywhere near it. But now, especially so if he actually somehow gets in the mix politically, it will be. I do think it will cause certain people to move certain ways, which I think we touched on this a little bit, like kind of the effect he would have on a DeSantis, on a Trump. You know, maybe it would suck some of the energy away from a possible Trump or DeSantis, because for me, honestly, I'd rather see Biden back or Trump than to see DeSantis. I know you kind of mentioned him being watered down. I think he already is kind of trash on a federal level if you look at his like voting record and stuff in the past.
Keep him in Florida, dude. I mean, it's like,
I love him in Florida. He's great. Yeah. On a state level, he's amazing. But I think when he gets the federal reins of power and he's able to control the military and the purse strings, it's going to be an issue. So, I think it was Reid who kind of coined, being the conservative Obama. So, which I think is a good way to put him for sure. He has that same type of energy.
Florida foreign policy, is different than national foreign policy, right?
Exactly.
So, it's a good point. So, yeah, and I think part of what you're seeing and what you're describing, and people, I think, I don't want to be like who get it, but it's like some of this is just that, like, dude, we're in so much trouble, and it's like it's going to take a radical, unpredictable black swan type event. Like, I think Elon buying Twitter is kind of a radical black swan event. Frankly, I don't think he's the Messiah. Okay, but like stuff's coming out that never would have come out, and it's still so little, but it's like it's the iceberg, right? And it's like that was kind of a black swan event. I don't think they ever wanted him to take over Twitter, and he did. And it's like we need more things like that to happen, but it's really problematic to like pin all our hopes on that. Like how many of these, right? So, yeah, man, I think these types of unexpected, uncontrollable, radical figures and events are really necessary right now to shake things up, wake more people up, and get people to really see what's going on. And I think those things have the power to wake more people up than the most reasoned article on Mises.org, love the guys, or the best podcast that Joe Rogan could put out. It's like that's what we need. So I think it's an interesting development.
All right, let's finish this up. And I want to touch on a couple things. It kind of almost a follow-up from our interview last year, because last year we covered a lot of that election and January 6th stuff. One thing I want to cover is we talked, I believe, if I recall correctly, we touched a lot on the Fed possibilities of the Jan 6 stuff. I believe I always forget if it's Ray or Mike. I know one's the actor, one's the Fed. And there was that Epps guy that was really shady. Yep. Apparently, come to find out through court documents about a month ago, I mean, if anyone out there wants it, you can just look it up on Google. January 6th, federal informants, Proud Boys. Apparently, they had a bunch. I think it was up to 8 or somewhere in the 8 is what the court records show. Yep. Federal informants within the Proud Boys. Now, to be clear, there's a distinction between an informant and an actual Fed, but I don't know. It's almost a difference without a distinction, sort of. But I guess it matters, sort of. Essentially, my opinion with them is it's a way for the Feds to be able to keep an arm's length and have plausible deniability most times.
Yeah.
But I guess it kind of helps from a manning position. But essentially, there were up to 8 of them, and it was funny. We talked about before. We kind of alluded to possible conspiracies of the Feds, egging it on, causing it. Kind of just fomenting discord in general. And now we come to find out there were 8 informants, but immediately the spin, because now the way it was framed and pretty much everywhere I saw is the way the mainstream media was framing it was, the question becomes, well, why didn't they notify us earlier?
Right.
If anything, then they blamed it on kind of like a miscommunication between informants and Feds. And it's like, it's just funny to see how the narrative shifts and it kind of slowly gets to where we were already at the beginning.
Yeah.
So I guess I just kind of want to get your thoughts on it, because it's just funny seeing us being vindicated.
Vindicated.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What the fuck?
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. I think that the breakdown was, you're probably referring to the same thing I'm thinking of, is I think it was like 2 in Oath Keepers, 6 in Proud Boys. But either way, it was sort of between both of those organizations. I want to share a couple of things about this. Number one, I've known Stuart Rhodes for many, many years. The first documentary I made, he's the guy who runs Oath Keepers. First documentary I made was called Nullification with Tom Woods about the 10th Amendment. Made it with Michael Bolden and Tom Woods. Stuart Rhodes was in that. I've known Stuart for a long time. Leading up to Jan 6, I was in communication with him. I saw him a few times. So he's somebody I knew. And after January 6th, some reporting came out from Revolver.news, Darren Beatty's, news organization, where they were making some assertions based on a lot of charging documents early on in the Jan 6 defendant cases that maybe Stuart Rhodes was a Fed, because there was these unnamed co-conspirators that seemed to be in high levels in the Oath Keepers. And he was putting pieces together and was like, Stuart Rhodes is a Fed. He hasn't been arrested yet, because at that time he hadn't been. And I had other people I talked to who were like, yeah, we think Stuart's a Fed. I even had the opportunity where Stuart confronted me at CPAC in Dallas last summer and was like, do you think I'm a Fed? And I said, no, because I was like, didn't want to get beat up for saying I thought he was, but I wasn't sure. And so what we've seen happen, though, is that Stuart Rhodes got arrested. Now he's been found guilty of sedition or seditious conspiracy. He maybe gets sentenced to 20 years in federal prison for, he didn't have a weapon in the Capitol or anything like that, but for planning the seditious conspiracy. So it's interesting as a couple of things. Number one, it looks as though Stewart was probably not the Fed. I don't think they burn their Feds like that. And And it's likely that there were people who are informants within the ranks that were gathering information that has been used to send him, down the river. Okay. The other thing that's interesting to note about this whole thing is that the Oath Keepers, they provided a lot of free security for a lot of the VIPs speaking with Stop the Steal. I was in vehicles with Ali Alexander and people from the Oath Keepers who were security, which is very interesting now that when you want to think about how the government might want to get informants right in the center of information gathering. Can you think of a better way than to have it be the guys who are providing security for the main organizers? It's like, so it's really a brilliant strategy from the federal agency level to be like, let's infiltrate Oath Keepers. Like, and so, yeah, it may have been informants. There may have been actual feds. The other thing with the Oath Keepers too, and Proud Boys is a little different, but just talking about the Oath Keepers' mission was to attract current and former military and police to be a part of their ranks. People who are going to be like, I'll defend the Constitution. I won't steal guns from citizens. And it's like, yeah, now in retrospect, it's not hard to see how that could be filled with people who are like, oh yeah, I support the Constitution. And they're just totally still working on behalf of the federal government. So I think that is something that is potentially been problematic in what I would call the Patriot movement. And for like 10 years now, it's likely that that's been at play. The other thing is with the Proud Boys, I don't know as much about it, but there is the other question about whether or not certain people had developed relationships with law enforcement and were in communication with them, but weren't actually feds or federal informants. Meaning, like when you are, and this is something I'm just suggesting, okay? Like when you're, at these heading these large organizations, activist organizations to go protest places where there's often law enforcement, all of that stuff going on, having relationships with law enforcement to be like, hey, we're coming here at this point in time, doing this thing. We want to let you guys know what's up, so there's not an issue, right? That kind of communication does happen, right? So it becomes difficult also to figure out, because Enrico Tarrio's talking to the feds, like, is he talking to the feds or is he talking to the feds, right? Is it like, and so it is really, really muddy what's going on. But I do think clearly there were people within those ranks that were feeding information back up to, people in the government who then, of course, didn't do anything to stop the worst event since 9/11, the Civil War, and Pearl Harbor combined. They didn't do anything to stop it. And the question always is like, what happened? Oh, there was a mistake or a breakdown. It's like at a certain point, you start to realize, no, that's by design. Like they got the information. They're not doing anything about it because they're going to take that opportunity. January 6th was a honeypot, right? January 6th enabled the federal government to ID 1 million people through cell phone tracking and data and social media and whatever, identify 1 million people that are anti-establishment there to be dealt with, right? I would say the Stop the Steal rallies provide that opportunity for them all throughout that whole time. And Antifa rallies, by the way, too. I don't think Antifa is totally hired by the government, right? Like, I think some of what's going on there is like organic, left-oriented anti-establishment. They're all tagged too, And so when you start seeing the operation at that level, I think it becomes pretty clear what's going on. And so, yeah, I do think it's a vindication. I do think it's likely Stuart Rhodes isn't a Fed at this point. And I feel like really bad that he's a guy who's likely going to spend 20 years behind bars for planning the overthrow of the government that went as poorly as an overthrow went on January 6th. Let's put it that way.
I like to. Go ahead. Were you going to say something?
I was just going to say, if Stuart Rhodes actually wanted to overthrow the government, it would have been full of guns and way more effective than it was. Like that definitely wasn't the plan. I can tell you that. So
I like to think your buddy Stuart that what they did is they're just like, you know what, one of them just don't take in. Just to sow some doubt within the ranks.
Yeah, right. Exactly. Yeah.
Kind of
Yeah.
genius move if you think about it. Just leave
Yeah.
one, make them wonder.
Well, yeah, and it is. Look, I think at the end of the day, man, like, I'm over here making movies, you're over here doing a podcast. Like, the fact of the matter is that I think we're all just doing things that in aggregate are dangerous to the power structure. And we're on the radar, like, and even those of us who aren't up to much. I mean, it's like, I've been emailed by the FBI and the Department of Justice. I've been audited by the IRS because I filmed these events. So, like, and I had almost no following on Twitter, like, I'm a nobody. And it's like, so don't just think because you're a nobody podcaster, or nobody libertarian volunteer or whatever, that you're not freaking on a list. It's like, the list is broad, it's big, and they got a lot of ways to get you on it. And so it's a dangerous time to be somebody who's vocal, who's won't self-censor themselves, and it's more needed than anything. So we got to do things to make ourselves cancel proof, to be able to have our income that's not tied to some, having to take a jab, or, be able to have communities of people who have our back around us. We've just got to do things to find ways to protect ourselves so that we can still do what we're called to do and have courage, and hopefully not have our lives ruined in the process.
Yeah, another thing. Last time we talked on a lot of that shenanigans of that thing that happens every 4 years, and I think me and you kind of came to a similar conclusion, which we wouldn't be very like astounded if it was, there was some foul play, but we think at the very least it was, manipulated by, or they manipulated democracy. Maybe
Yep.
not the specific, numbers of people in a blatant way, but with the powers of the media and stuff, they were able to manipulate it, since it's just about making the masses do a certain thing. And so, yeah, that would mean technically that one thing that happens every 4 years was completely on the up and up, but the government had infiltrated these other organizations to essentially get their will through by manipulating the general public through the media, essentially, or social media particularly. The
Yeah.
reason I bring this up is because we just had the Twitter files that drop, which, I mean, I guess you can give me your opinion. I thought they were a little bit underwhelming, but I guess it's just for me. I mean, it's underwhelming, but it's a good thing, because it's kind of like, yeah, I mean, I already fucking knew this. But, like, like, it's for normal people, they're like, oh, here's the thing that says it happened. It's like, I don't know. Like, yeah, there wasn't like a smoking gun for us that knew it was happening, but it's kind of like, all right, well, I've heard a million different ways that they're possibly doing this or likely doing this. At a certain point, you're like, okay, like, yeah, I don't have a smoking gun, but I have a bajillion of, like, I don't know, still warm guns. I don't know.
Yeah.
So
yeah, I think since we last talked about this, some things have changed for me a little bit, or I've got more clarity. And the way I see it now is, I see that after 2016, the plan to ensure that Trump did not get a second term was underway from then. Everything from Mark Elias and the lawfare that happened to and George Soros and others' money to come in and get certain DAs and secretaries of state and all of this elected, which is like, legal to the degree it's legal, right? What they're doing, but it's like strategic people to come into places that will have the ability to do certain things to shift how the elections are held 4 years in the future or 2 years in the future. That stuff was happening, right? And like, that's actually documented. And so then, like, this whole idea of even getting these people put into positions in social media, like, I think that was likely part of the plan to try to control narrative. They saw what happened when the Hillary Clinton story came out, right? And some of the communication in 2016, the Comey Hillary Clinton thing, they say, oh, that's what gave Trump the election. There was communication that came out, and I think Matt Taibbi's or Barry Weiss's, where it's like, people within Twitter were clearly like, the Hunter Biden thing is going to do to Biden what the Comey thing did to Clinton. They absolutely were like, there's no way we can allow this to happen. And I think the ethos of Trump is an existential threat that cannot be allowed to do another 4 years, animated so much of what went on in social media, mass media, all that sort of thing. And so then when you get to the brass tacks of like, the 2020 election, really COVID was the last thing that was used as a cover in order to loosen chain of custody, change election laws, not through the legislatures of states as is constitutionally required, but through the stroke of a pen of the Secretary of State or even election boards or a judge saying, oh, yeah, okay, there's another 14 days for this to happen. And oh, yeah, chain of custody. Oh, yeah, mass mail-in ballots. Oh, yeah. And so with 2020, we saw for the first time certain states that were like, every citizen will get a ballot mailed to them. And now I think in 2022, what some people are getting hip to is that it's the collection of ballots that is really the key to electioneering. And so you had certain practices that were introduced in 2020 that didn't exist, that now continue to exist. And COVID was the cover to make it happen. And so to the degree that I look at it from a 30,000 foot level, on one hand, I'm like, Trump got outplayed, plain and simple. And part of the reason he got outplayed in 2020 is because the establishment Republican Party wanted him out, right? There were people who were not going to do anything to get him a second term, right? And I do think that there was enough fraud and illegally cast votes. If you define that, constitutional laws mean what is legal, right? So laws that say this is how we're going to do elections, but the state constitution says that the legislature has to change it. Those are illegal votes, right? I think there's definitely over 60,000 collectively in those 5 states that would have swung the election the other way. I absolutely think that was true. And I think what's more important is to look at that Time magazine article that came out about the secret conspiracy and recognize that they actually told you everything that they did there. And part of the reason I think they said it is because they have got the infrastructure very entrenched now. It's going to be very difficult to break it. And some of it's like legal or questionably legal or whatever. But, even the FTX thing right now, Sam Bankman-Fried and like the millions of dollars, hundreds of millions of dollars, how all that flowed in to potentially impact the 2022 election. Like, I just think the layers and layers that are there make it pretty clear that there's sort of like an institutional structure now that makes it possible for elections to be swung one way or another. And I think that's the rules of the game now. And I think it's a problem for us because if we can't vote the bums out, libertarians like to be flippant about this, be like, I don't vote. And, voting, it's like, but if you can't vote the bums out, then you are a slave, being grifted upon. Taxation is theft. You have no say about it. They're going to send it to their money laundering scheme in Ukraine or through FTX or whatever. And they're all going to get rich and you're going to have a collapsing economy and currency and, eat bugs. So that's the problem. So, So hopefully that brings some clarity to what I think about it. But perilous times.
Yeah, for sure. I do think the lesson to be taken from Trump getting in his term in office is the idea that you're going to be able to get one of your guys in at the federal level and actually be able, because people will fantasize about getting Ron Paul in or something. It's like, if he really did end up falling through, and I think Ron Paul would be the kind of guy to have strength of character to actually try to put forth his ideas. I think he would likely be someone who takes a convertible ride. But, on the off chance he didn't, they would just hem him up every which way in bureaucratic manners like they did Trump to some extent. And then I think the, especially 2020 and specifically the event we're kind of alluding to here, and I'm kind of dancing around a little bit for YouTube censors. I think that also tells you that like the chances of you even being able to get your guy in there now are slim as well. So I think, I've said, especially for my anarchist listeners connect with this, maybe some people are new to this. I think really Hoppe or Konkin are really the only ways to go, in my opinion.
Right.
You're like, you either got I'm more hip on Konkin, but there's definitely merits to Hoppe. And, I think the more energy you're putting in the places that matter most, like if you're putting more of a, identity, within you, your family, your community, into your local area, as opposed to some sort of large federal organization. Even just on a how you identify, how you feel with it, not in like I don't know how I'm trying to say, but yeah, that will essentially undermine the federal powers that be. Just to some extent, it's kind of hopeless. So that's why, as silly as it may sound, when I say somebody like Ye, I can see great possibilities from that. It's not because I think he's going to get in there and do something. It's just that he's kind of showing it for what it is. He's a bulldozer. But let's get out on here. I want to get an update on how our buddy the QAnon shaman is doing, and then we'll get out of here, because I just think people should know what's going on with him and how they're going dirty.
Yeah, so for those who don't know, the QAnon shaman spent, I think, 311 days in solitary confinement prior to him pleading guilty to interrupting Congress, which carried with it a large penalty if they wanted to go for it. And they actually gave him 41 months in prison. They gave him credit for time served, which was good. So he had about another 30 months that he was going to have to serve. And he's now a little over a year into that 30-month term. There's a possibility that he is going to see the light of day in 2023, and maybe even sooner than you would think, potentially the spring or summer of 2023. I've heard he's in really good spirits. I have not spoken to him for a long time. I've spoken to him since he's been in jail, but it's been a while. And but he's in good spirits. They didn't break him. Solitary didn't break him. When he spoke at his sentencing hearing, you would never know that that's a man who was spent 311 days in solitary. And so he's looking forward to coming back out and regaining his life, regaining his freedom. And he's, was behind us and in our corner and gave his blessing to us to tell his story in Q Sent Me, which we, the first episode of that, like I said before, is on My Movies Plus. It's almost an hour long. And for anybody who's just interested in this guy, it's the episode that's got his whole story. He tells it directly to us, all of the B-roll and the video that goes with it. We've got calls that he had with the FBI on his way back from DC. Him going on the Alex Jones. There's a lot of interesting, crazy stuff that happened to him in just that 72-hour period that we cover. But you'll get an insight into this guy's head and mind. I think no matter what you think about him, whether you think, oh, was he a Fed or BLM, or, was he really a MAGA guy? Is he crazy? Is he, I think no matter what your perspective is, when you come to the film, you'll see something different than you expected with this guy. So we're really happy with how that episode's turned out, and people can go check that out. And we've got 2 more episodes dropping, hoping to have the next one out right around Jan 6th of this year. And then the 3rd episode. And we're going to get into the issues of federal agent infiltration, the ramifications of weaponizing the DOJ against political dissidents. That's the expanded story we'll get into those future episodes. So, yeah, so that's it, man. He in 2023, we're hoping he's going to be walking free, having served his time, and it'll be interesting to see what happens from there. But definitely a political prisoner, definitely a guy who was just made an example of, who didn't have a weapon, who didn't damage any property, who didn't commit violence, who actively told protesters not to hurt police officers, who went around and told people, Trump told us to go home, guys, let's go home, But yeah, he was the symbol of that day, and he had to be done, he had to be given a stiff sentence in order to make a point.
Yeah, well, I'll be definitely trying to get him on the show whenever he gets out.
Right on. Let me know.
I'll definitely be hitting you up. So if you want to just go and drop whatever plugs again, whatever maybe you forgot or want to
go to mymoviesplus.com. You can check out the Most Canceled Man in America there for free right now, and also for $7 a month or $30 a year. Catch Q Sent Me as we release that. I also have a podcast that we do some streaming over at cozy.tv. It's cancel proof, cozy.tv. Our show is cancel proof. And we do some interesting things on there. We have conversations, talk about political issues and ideas, talk about our the film projects we're making. And so I've been streaming more regularly over there. Other than that, I'm basically off social media still. So yeah, go support the film. Go cast a vote for free speech content over at Movies Plus. They're great guys doing great work. And, we need to support the counter economy. So.
Well, yeah, I definitely suggest you guys go check that out. It's always a good conversation I have whenever Jason's on. So I'm sure he puts out great content. I need to check it out. Cozy, I'll have to figure that out. I'm kind of a boomer when it comes to tech. So
COZY.tv. And that's where you can go see. Well, you used to be able to go see Nick Fuentes 5 nights a week, but he's put his show on hiatus. But, the next time he does a show, you never know if Ye's going to be in studio with him. So anyway, Cozy's got some interesting things going on over there.
Yeah, I'll have to check it out. I suggest others do as well. I didn't know you had your own show. You're definitely a good talker, so I think it's got to be good shit. So if you guys like this, please subscribe, like, share, all that good stuff. This is a No Way Jose show, YouTube, all the major auto podcasters, Odyssey as well. Follow me on Twitter at SenorJose2020. Patreon.com, No Way Jose 2020 if you want to give me money. With that, we are out. This was a blast. I love having you on. I'll definitely have to have you on next time you have another documentary or something like that coming out. But appreciate your time.
All right, bro. Take it easy.
You too.